The nurse smiled as she placed my tiny daughter into my trembling arms, telling me that every mother deserved to go home to peace after bringing a new life into the world. 5 days later, I stood outside the only home I had ever owned with a newborn pressed against my chest, staring at a bright red sold sign planted in my front yard. The locks had been changed. My bank account had been emptied. My husband had vanished without leaving a single explanation. The only thing waiting for me was a folded eviction notice tucked beneath the welcome mat where we had once dreamed of raising our family. In one cruel afternoon, I lost my marriage, my home, and every future I believed we were building together. If you believe kindness can survive betrayal, if you believe forgiveness is stronger than revenge, and if stories of hope and second chances inspire you, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel. Every act of support helps our community continue sharing stories that remind us light still exists, even after the darkest days. My name is Claire Weston, and before my world collapsed, I believed I was one of the lucky ones. I had spent 7 years building a quiet life with my husband, Garrett Holloway. We were never wealthy, but we had enough. Garrett worked as a real estate consultant while I managed the administrative office of a local elementary school. We lived in a modest 2-story house surrounded by maple trees outside a peaceful town where nearly everyone greeted each other by name. Every Saturday morning we visited the local farmers market, arguing playfully over which flowers belonged in the garden. Every Sunday afternoon we painted another room in the house we called our forever home. We talked endlessly about the family we hoped to have someday. When I finally discovered I was pregnant after years of disappointment, Garrett cried harder than I did. At least, I believed those tears were real. Throughout my pregnancy, Garrett slowly changed in ways I kept trying to excuse. He traveled more often for work. His phone never left his hand. He smiled at messages that disappeared before I could glance at the screen. Sometimes he came home carrying expensive watches or tailored jackets that certainly cost more than we could afford, explaining that successful clients expected him to look professional. I wanted to believe him because trusting someone is much easier than accepting the possibility that the person you love may already be living another life. Pregnancy exhausted me more than I expected. My blood pressure fluctuated, and the doctor advised me to rest as much as possible during the final months. Garrett insisted he would handle all the finances so I could focus entirely on preparing for our daughter. Looking back, I realized that was the moment I unknowingly handed him every key to our future. I signed paperwork without reading every line because I trusted my husband completely. He explained that some documents were simply refinancing papers to lower our monthly payments before the baby arrived. I kissed him, thanked him for taking care of everything, and never imagined I was signing away the very roof over our heads. Our daughter, Nora, arrived on a bright spring morning after 20 hours of labor. The moment she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, every hardship of pregnancy seemed insignificant. I believed I had reached the happiest chapter of my life. Garrett stood beside my hospital bed smiling for photographs, kissing my forehead, telling nurses how blessed he felt. Everyone admired what looked like the perfect family. Then, on the 3rd day after Nora's birth, Garrett began receiving constant phone calls. He claimed an important property deal was falling apart and apologized repeatedly for leaving the hospital early. He promised he would finish everything before we returned home. I believed him. Even when he missed the morning we were discharged, I convinced myself that responsible husbands sometimes had unavoidable work emergencies. My older sister, Tessa, drove me home because Garrett said he would meet us there after finishing with his clients. During the drive, I imagined placing Nora into the nursery we had painted together in soft shades of cream and lavender. I pictured sitting beside the nursery window while spring sunlight filled the room. I had absolutely no idea that every memory connected to that house had already been sold to strangers. As Tessa turned into our street, something immediately felt wrong. A moving truck stood in the driveway. Several unfamiliar workers carried boxes through the front door. Bright balloons hung beside a real estate sign marked sold. At first I thought Garrett had somehow arranged renovations without telling me. Then I noticed strangers carrying our dining table onto the truck. Tessa slammed on the brakes so suddenly that Nora began crying. I stepped out of the car with shaky legs, still recovering from childbirth. Every step sent pain through my body, but the ache inside my heart quickly became far worse than the stitches I carried home from the hospital. A middle-aged woman approached me with confusion written across her face. She politely introduced herself as the new homeowner and asked whether I needed help finding another address. Those words didn't make sense. New homeowner. I laughed nervously because surely there had been some ridiculous misunderstanding. Then she explained she had legally purchased the property 2 weeks earlier and today was the official possession date. 2 weeks earlier. While I had been preparing for labor. While I had been folding baby clothes. While I believed Garrett was attending work meetings. My knees nearly gave way beneath me. I insisted the house belonged to my husband and me. The woman looked horrified before quietly explaining that Garrett had signed every document himself. According to the records she had received, I had also signed the necessary legal paperwork weeks before closing. That was when every refinancing document flashed through my mind. Every signature. Every page I never properly read. Every moment I trusted the man I loved. One of the movers approached carrying a cardboard box filled with framed family photographs. He apologized gently and explained they had found them in the garage because everything else had already been removed. Everything. Our furniture. Our savings. The nursery. Even Nora's crib. Someone handed me a single envelope addressed in Garrett's handwriting. Inside rested only 3 sentences. He wrote that he deserved a different life, that he had fallen in love with someone else, and that he hoped I would eventually move on. There wasn't one apology. Not one explanation. Not one mention of the daughter born only 5 days earlier. Just a cold farewell from a man who had erased us as though we had never existed. I remember standing there under the warm afternoon sun, unable to cry. The human mind sometimes protects itself by refusing to accept pain all at once. Everything became strangely quiet. I could hear birds singing nearby while my entire life crumbled before my eyes. Tessa wrapped one arm around me while carefully supporting Nora with the other. She kept asking me to breathe. I hadn't even realized I was holding my breath. The new homeowners offered to let me gather any remaining belongings left inside. I walked through empty rooms echoing with unfamiliar footsteps. The walls where family photographs once hung showed pale outlines against the paint. The nursery contained nothing except a single forgotten stuffed rabbit sitting alone in the corner. I picked it up and held it against my chest. It was the only gift Garrett had personally chosen for Nora. Now it looked abandoned too. That afternoon, Tessa brought us to her small townhouse. She insisted I stay as long as necessary. She transformed her home office into a temporary nursery using borrowed furniture from neighbors. Watching complete strangers donate diapers, blankets, bottles, and baby clothes broke something inside me. People who barely knew me showed more compassion in one afternoon than my own husband had shown in months. The following week became a blur of legal appointments, paperwork, and heartbreaking discoveries. Garrett had emptied our joint accounts days before Nora was born. He had quietly transferred investments into separate accounts months earlier. The family vehicle had also been sold. Even the life insurance beneficiary had been changed without my knowledge. Every document revealed another carefully planned betrayal. The attorney finally looked up from a mountain of papers and spoke words I never expected to hear. Garrett hadn't acted impulsively. He had spent nearly a year preparing to disappear. While I believed we were preparing for a baby, he had been preparing to abandon us. That realization hurt more than every financial loss combined because it proved the deception had begun long before our daughter took her first breath. Social media eventually revealed another painful truth. Friends began privately sending photographs they discovered online. Garrett had been living openly with another woman named Vanessa during many of his supposed business trips. They smiled together on beaches, wineries, and expensive resorts while I remained at home decorating a nursery for our unborn child. I stopped looking at the photographs after the third one. Some betrayals don't deserve another second of your attention. Still, every morning I woke hoping someone would tell me it had all been an impossible misunderstanding. Instead, Reality greeted me every day through Nora's gentle cries and the tiny room we now borrowed inside Tessa's home. One afternoon, while pushing Nora in a borrowed stroller through a nearby park, I noticed an elderly man struggling to carry several grocery bags after one of them burst open across the sidewalk. Fresh apples rolled in every direction as pedestrians hurried past without stopping. Despite my exhaustion and lingering pain after childbirth, I carefully parked the stroller beneath the shade of a large oak tree and began gathering every scattered apple. The elderly gentleman looked embarrassed, apologizing repeatedly for inconveniencing me. His hands trembled slightly as we repacked the groceries together. He thanked me with genuine warmth, saying kindness had become increasingly rare. I simply smiled and told him that everyone eventually needs someone willing to stop for a few minutes. He looked at Nora sleeping peacefully inside the stroller before quietly saying that children often arrive in our lives carrying blessings we cannot yet recognize. At the time, I thought he was simply offering comforting words to a struggling new mother. I had no idea that this ordinary stranger would soon become connected to the black limousine that would appear 2 weeks later and change the course of our lives forever. The old gentleman smiled one last time before slowly walking toward a waiting driver who had parked several streets away. I watched him disappear into the afternoon crowd without another thought. Life had become so heavy that every day blurred into the next. My world revolved around feeding Nora, recovering from childbirth, completing legal paperwork, and pretending I was stronger than I actually felt. Every evening I thanked Tessa for giving us a place to stay, and every night I cried silently into my pillow after everyone else had fallen asleep. I refused to let my daughter grow up hearing her mother's tears, even though my heart seemed determined to break itself all over again each sunrise. The following days brought one disappointment after another. My attorney explained that Garrett had exploited legal loopholes and forged the appearance of informed consent through documents I had unknowingly signed. Challenging the sale would require years of expensive litigation with no guarantee of success because the new homeowners had purchased the property legally and without knowledge of the fraud behind it. They were innocent people who had simply bought a house. The law could not punish them for trusting paperwork that appeared completely legitimate. Hearing those words felt like standing in quicksand. Every answer created another problem. Every solution required money I no longer had. Friends slowly stopped calling. Some felt uncomfortable around tragedy. Others believed Garrett's version of the story after he quietly spread rumors claiming I had become emotionally unstable after childbirth. He painted himself as a husband trapped in an impossible marriage while conveniently leaving out the mistress, the emptied bank accounts, and the newborn daughter he abandoned without hesitation. I discovered that betrayal rarely travels alone. It often arrives hand in hand with lies designed to protect the person responsible. Despite everything, Nora became my reason to keep moving forward. Every morning when she opened her bright blue eyes and wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, I remembered that one beautiful soul still depended entirely on me. She never cared whether we lived in a borrowed room or a mansion. She simply wanted warmth, food, safety, and love. That innocent trust became the foundation upon which I slowly rebuilt myself. To earn some income while on maternity leave, I began organizing school records remotely for the principal who had always treated me with kindness. The work was modest, but it reminded me that I still possessed value beyond the role of someone's wife. During Nora's naps, I completed spreadsheets while balancing my laptop beside her crib. Tessa often laughed that our tiny office looked like a daycare mixed with a business center. Those little moments of laughter became precious because they reminded me that happiness had not disappeared forever. It was simply hiding beneath layers of grief. One warm afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after I had helped the elderly man gather his groceries, Tessa and I sat on her front porch while Nora slept peacefully in her stroller. The neighborhood children rode bicycles beneath the bright sunshine, and the smell of freshly cut grass drifted through the air. For the first time since everything happened, I managed to drink an entire cup of tea without bursting into tears. Then an elegant black limousine slowly turned onto the quiet street. It moved so slowly that every neighbor noticed. The polished vehicle finally stopped directly in front of Tessa's townhouse. Several curtains shifted as curious neighbors peeked outside. The driver stepped out first, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He opened the rear passenger door with practiced precision. The same elderly man from the park emerged carrying a polished wooden cane. For several seconds I simply stared. He smiled warmly as though greeting an old friend. Only then did I realize his clothes, posture, and quiet confidence looked entirely different from the tired man struggling with grocery bags 2 weeks earlier. He walked toward me with steady determination before gently extending his hand. He introduced himself properly this time. His name was Theodore Ashcombe. I recognized the surname immediately. Ashcombe Holdings. One of the largest property development companies in the country. His family owned hospitals, apartment communities, charitable foundations, and countless businesses. Newspapers regularly featured photographs of Theodore receiving humanitarian awards for funding children's hospitals and homeless shelters. The man I had believed was simply an elderly stranger was one of the wealthiest philanthropists in the nation. Embarrassment rushed across my face. He noticed immediately and laughed softly. He explained that he often walked through neighborhoods without security because he preferred meeting ordinary people naturally. Too many individuals treated him differently the moment they recognized his name. Sometimes he intentionally left his driver several blocks away so he could enjoy a peaceful afternoon like everyone else. Then his expression became serious. He told me he had never forgotten the young mother who stopped to help him while everyone else hurried past. He explained that after returning home that day, he had asked one of his assistants to learn my name because something about my exhausted smile stayed with him. Within 24 hours, they discovered the heartbreaking news surrounding Garrett's betrayal. Theodore admitted he struggled to sleep after reading the report. He had spent decades building affordable housing projects for struggling families, yet one mother and newborn had lost everything through calculated cruelty. He said he couldn't ignore it. At first I assumed he had come to offer a charitable donation. I thanked him sincerely but gently explained there were many people facing even greater hardships than mine. He smiled again. Then he handed me a cream-colored envelope embossed with a silver seal. Inside rested a single key attached to a handwritten card. The note simply read, "Every child deserves a safe place to come home." Confused, I looked back at him. Theodore explained that one of his company's newly renovated cottages had remained unsold because they intended to use it as a model home. That morning he had instructed his legal team to remove it from the market. He wanted Nora to grow up there. Not as renters. As owners. I thought I had misunderstood. No stranger gives away a home. Not in real life. Not to someone they met for 10 minutes. I immediately refused. I couldn't possibly accept something so extraordinary. Theodore listened patiently before quietly telling me about his own daughter. Many years earlier, she had died shortly after giving birth due to unexpected medical complications. His granddaughter survived, but Theodore never stopped wondering how frightened his daughter must have felt during those final hours. When he saw me helping him despite clearly recovering from childbirth, he saw the kindness his daughter had always shown others. He wasn't trying to replace what I had lost. He simply wanted to honor the memory of someone he still missed every single day. The porch fell silent. Even Tessa struggled to hold back tears. Theodore explained that kindness always creates ripples. Sometimes those ripples travel farther than we ever imagine. I still hesitated. Accepting such generosity felt impossible. Sensing my discomfort, Theodore offered another solution. Instead of viewing the cottage as charity, he invited me to become community coordinator for one of his nonprofit housing initiatives after my maternity leave ended. The position included a competitive salary, flexible hours for raising Nora, and ownership of the home as part of a long-term employment agreement designed to help families committed to serving others. It wasn't a handout. It was an opportunity. For the first time in weeks, hope quietly entered my heart. A few days later, Theodore personally drove us to the cottage. The house wasn't enormous. It didn't need to be. White wooden fences surrounded a cheerful garden already blooming with colorful flowers. Sunlight poured through large front windows into a cozy living room. There was a small nursery painted in gentle shades of cream, almost identical to the one I had once imagined for Nora. I walked through every room in complete disbelief. Nothing about the house felt extravagant. It simply felt peaceful. For the first time since leaving the hospital, I whispered the words I had been too afraid to believe. "We're finally home." Nora smiled in her sleep as if she somehow understood. Over the next several weeks I poured every ounce of energy into rebuilding our lives. Theodore became more than an employer. He became a trusted mentor, encouraging me to help struggling single parents who arrived at the nonprofit carrying stories painfully similar to my own. Listening to them taught me something unexpected. Pain isolates us. Compassion reconnects us. The more I helped others rebuild their lives, the stronger my own became. Then, just as peace finally returned, another unexpected letter arrived. This one came from Garrett. He wanted to meet. He claimed everything had fallen apart. He said he desperately needed my forgiveness. I stared at the envelope for a long time before placing it unopened on the kitchen table. Months earlier I would have rushed to understand why. Now, I wasn't even sure I wanted to know. For several minutes, I couldn't bring myself to open Garrett's letter. It rested on the kitchen table beside Nora's bottle as though it belonged in our peaceful little home. Somehow, it didn't. Everything about that envelope carried the weight of a life I had fought so hard to leave behind. I had spent months rebuilding myself one small step at a time. I learned to laugh again. I learned to trust kind people again. Most importantly, I learned that my happiness could no longer depend on someone else's promises. The frightened woman who had stood outside a house she no longer owned had slowly disappeared. In her place stood a mother who understood that strength is rarely something we are born with. It is something suffering quietly teaches us. The next morning, after feeding Nora breakfast beneath the bright sunshine streaming through our kitchen window, I finally unfolded Garrett's letter. His handwriting looked familiar, yet strangely distant. He admitted that the relationship he had abandoned us for had collapsed only weeks after he disappeared. Vanessa had discovered that most of the expensive lifestyle he promised was built on debt, deception, and money he had stolen from our shared accounts. Once the money disappeared, she disappeared as well. Garrett confessed that several business deals had failed, lawsuits were being filed against him, and creditors had begun seizing everything he owned. He claimed he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He wrote that seeing photographs of Nora online had filled him with unbearable regret. He begged for one chance to explain everything in person. Months earlier those words would have shattered me. Now they simply made me sad. Not because I wanted him back. Because he had thrown away something priceless for something temporary. I folded the letter neatly and placed it inside a drawer. I didn't answer. Not immediately. The following week I continued my work with Theodore's Housing Foundation. Every afternoon families arrived carrying stories that reminded me how unpredictable life could become. One father had lost his home after a factory closed. A grandmother was raising 3 grandchildren after a tragic accident. A young widow had nowhere to go after unexpected medical bills consumed every penny she owned. Listening to their stories slowly changed the way I viewed my own pain. I realized suffering is never a competition. Every broken heart carries its own weight. The greatest gift we can offer each other is compassion without comparison. One afternoon Theodore invited me to join him during the opening of a newly renovated community center. As we walked through the building filled with sunlight and laughter, he quietly told me something I would never forget. He said wealth had allowed him to build houses. Kindness had allowed him to build homes. There was a profound difference. Walls protect people from the weather. Love protects them from hopelessness. Those words settled deep inside my heart. A few days later my attorney called with unexpected news. Garrett had finally been located. Financial investigators had uncovered evidence that he forged several signatures beyond the paperwork involving our house. He had manipulated client contracts, hidden income, and transferred assets illegally. Criminal charges unrelated to our marriage were now moving forward. The attorney explained that while recovering my former home remained impossible, the court had frozen Garrett's remaining assets. There was one more surprise. Because the money he stole from our joint accounts had been clearly documented, the court ordered partial financial restitution. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to create a college education fund for Nora. For the first time since everything began, justice quietly appeared. Not through revenge. Through truth. A month later, Garrett requested another meeting through our attorneys. After careful thought, I agreed. Not for him. For myself. I wanted to close the final chapter without carrying bitterness into the rest of my life. The meeting took place on a warm afternoon inside a quiet family mediation office surrounded by large windows overlooking a peaceful garden. Everything happened during daylight, exactly as I wanted. There would be no dramatic confrontations hidden in darkness. When Garrett entered the room, I barely recognized him. The expensive tailored suits had disappeared. The confidence that once filled every room was gone. He looked older than his years, exhausted by consequences he had never expected to face. For several long moments he simply stared at the photograph of Nora sitting on the table. Then he began crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. He admitted he had convinced himself that chasing excitement would make him happier than ordinary family life. Vanessa constantly praised his ambition, his appearance, and his success. She made him feel important while I was focused on preparing for motherhood. Instead of communicating honestly, he chose deception. By the time he realized what he had destroyed, it was too late. He apologized repeatedly. Not once. Not twice. Dozens of times. He admitted abandoning a newborn daughter would remain the greatest shame of his entire life. As I listened, I noticed something surprising. The anger I expected to feel wasn't there anymore. Pain had slowly transformed into peace. I told Garrett something he clearly never expected to hear. I said forgiveness and reconciliation were not the same thing. I could forgive him without inviting him back into our lives. Forgiveness meant I refused to let his betrayal control my future. It did not erase accountability. It did not restore trust. It simply freed my own heart from carrying hatred forever. He lowered his head. I could see he understood. Before leaving, I handed him a recent photograph of Nora smiling beneath the apple tree in our garden. I told him that one day, if he truly changed, if he consistently accepted responsibility, and if he became the kind of man our daughter deserved to know, I would never stand between a father and a child seeking a healthy relationship. But that future would have to be earned through years of actions. Not promises. He accepted the photograph with trembling hands. That was the last time I saw him. Life continued moving forward in beautiful, unexpected ways. As Nora grew older, our little cottage became filled with laughter instead of grief. The nursery walls that once represented heartbreak now displayed finger paintings, family photographs, and shelves overflowing with storybooks. Every spring we planted flowers together in the front garden. Theodore often visited on sunny weekends carrying homemade cookies that were never quite as perfect as he believed they were. Nora affectionately called him Grandpa Theo, a title that always brought quiet tears to his eyes. The housing foundation also flourished. Inspired by my own experience, I helped create a special program for mothers leaving hospitals with nowhere safe to go. Every family received temporary housing, parenting support, employment guidance, and childcare assistance while rebuilding their lives. The program eventually became known for one simple belief. No mother should ever carry a newborn into uncertainty alone. Years later, during the dedication ceremony for a new housing community, Theodore stood beside me beneath a bright afternoon sky. Hundreds of families gathered outside their new homes while children played across freshly planted lawns. Theodore gently squeezed my shoulder. He reminded everyone that remarkable change rarely begins with extraordinary people. Sometimes it begins with one exhausted young mother who stops to pick up scattered apples for a stranger. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of someone else's miracle. Looking across the joyful crowd, I finally understood what he meant. If I had chosen to ignore that elderly man because I was overwhelmed by my own suffering, our paths might never have crossed again. Kindness had quietly opened a door that despair never could. Before this story ends, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a meaningful comment and tell us, do you believe forgiveness brings peace, Or do you think some betrayals can never truly be forgiven? Your thoughts may encourage someone else who is struggling today. As I tucked Nora into bed for her afternoon nap one warm spring day, sunlight danced across the same stuffed rabbit I had rescued from the empty nursery months earlier. It sat proudly on a shelf beside family photographs that no one could ever take away again. I smiled because I finally understood something life had been trying to teach me all along. A house can be sold. Money can be stolen. Promises can be broken. But courage, compassion, and hope belong to the people who choose them every single day. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And remember, sometimes the greatest miracle doesn't arrive the moment your life falls apart. Sometimes it quietly pulls into your street on a bright afternoon, inside a black limousine, carrying the second chance you never imagined was waiting for you.